you should have access to the main offering or the main fund or whatever it is to what their documents are. And you want to look at that to understand what's the main deal, because that's ultimately what you're investing in. And so you want to understand what those risks are and what's going on there. And one thing with that is look at what returns are they offering. I've seen sometimes where, and there can be occasions where it makes sense, but I've seen sometimes where, maybe the main fund is doing a 80-20 split and, a 10% pref. I'm just making numbers.
Yeah.
But then the fund of fund is doing a 70-30 split and like a 6% pref.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case to where you're getting returns that are different than what investing directly is, you want to make sure there's a reason for that. Sure. Sometimes the reason might be the main fund might require $500,000 to invest, whereas this fund to fund, you can do $25,000. Okay, if that's the case, yeah, you can take a bit of a haircut. Maybe not the example I just gave, but you can take a bit of a haircut because there's an advantage you're getting because you probably wouldn't have otherwise been able to invest in this deal in the first place.
You're listening to the Accredited Investors Only podcast, presented by Accredited Life.
Nick, how you feeling today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I am doing very well, very well. So, welcome to the show. I'm happy you're here. Yeah, it's great that you're with us. Let's start with an introduction. I always like to hear people introduce themselves in their own words. So, who is Nick?
My name is Nic McGrue. I am the founder of Polymath Legal. At Polymath Legal, we help real estate investors lawfully raise capital so they can generate passive income while creating generational wealth. So what that means is we work with syndications, funds, and people that are raising capital for projects. And we work primarily with real estate projects, but especially in the current market, we've been doing a lot more of business acquisitions as well. So we work in various industries, but real estate's the main one. But if you're looking to raise capital for your project, we can assist you in making sure you do that without having the SEC lock you up or anything like that.
Well, yeah, I think it's such an important part of the business is getting the legal side right. It's like just a foundational thing. And I think you hear so many, mixed things with social media, and you listen to podcasts and stuff like that, and people say, or different things, and you hear some conflicting information. What would you say are some of the largest kind of misconceptions, and things that for an accredited investor to look out for when they're investing in, a deal that they were referred to or something they found online, or, what do they want to be looking out for?
Yeah. So one of the big things from an investor viewpoint, you want to make sure that they do indeed, as you said, have their legal T's and I's dotted and crossed. So if they're coming to you saying, and you say, where's the PPM? And they're like, oh, this is just a joint venture. I hear that a lot. A lot of times that's going to be a big red flag. Now you can do projects as a joint venture, but in most cases, if there's passive investors, meaning that somebody's just going to write a check and expect to get bigger checks back, then whoever is receiving that initial check is selling a security, which means they either need to register or have an exemption. And so with many of the exemptions and even with registration, a PPM or some sort of big, scary long disclosure document is involved. So if they don't have that disclosure document, that's a big red flag to me right away. Another thing that I see a lot, and it's not always tied to the investors, but I have some clients, because while we do mainly represent the sponsors, we also have clients that are investing and we'll review that documentation for them as well. And so I've had some clients say, yeah, I'm looking at getting into this investment. And then they also told me that if I find more investors, they'll give me a cut or a commission or percentage.
Sure.
That is very, very problematic. I like your reaction there because that's the same thing I say.
I see it all the time. How can they do it the right way? I mean, because I see that all the time where it's like, you refer a friend, you get something. People, as a fundraiser, people ask me all the time, how can they make more? How can they get compensated for bringing referrals? And for 10 years, I've always said, there's not really a way to do it. So am I wrong? Is there a way to do it? And how do you do it the right way?
There's not a good way to do it. So the SEC does allow what's called a finder's fee, but a finder's fee is solely essentially for the introduction. And further, the SEC goes further and says it can't be a transaction-based compensation, meaning that the payment of that finder's fee can't be based upon an investment being made or how much investment is being made. And so that's the way you can compensate somebody, but that's not what people want to hear, because as the operator, that's a lot of risk on you, because you could say, hey, Nick, I'll pay you $1,000 for each person you introduce me. And I could say, great, here's 10 people. give me my $10,000, and all 10 of them might say, yeah, you know what, we're not interested in investing. So now you just lost 10 grand, didn't really get anything from it. So that's the way to do it properly. But it's not lost on me that that is not an ideal way by any means.
Sure, sure. Okay, well, at least I haven't been turning people down for 10 years on that, because you'd love to do it. You know what I mean? If you could, but it's just I've never seen it. The risk isn't worth the reward, and you know, if it, yeah, I feel like a lot of these people do these programs, and it's just like, you know, they're probably on shaky ground. They're like definitely right on shaky ground. So
I see it a lot. I see it a whole lot. I've even had people not realizing that I'm a securities attorney offer that to me, and I'm like, whoa, 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 you can't do that.
yeah,
Now the SEC did look into this probably about 3.5 years ago, and they had a proposed rule that essentially would allow people to get the commission like we want. But how they do their rules is they'll propose the rule, and then people can write in and say what they think, and then they might move forward on it or change it or what have you. They put out the proposal, and I haven't seen any movement since. So there was potential good news a couple years ago, and I was hopeful. But as the months go on and on and on without any traction, I'm far less hopeful now.
Yeah, yeah. It would be nice, you know, in other businesses, you know, if like in a construction, your contractor or something, you refer clients, you know, your plumber, you refer clients or something, and you know, you give somebody a discount or a little bonus or something like that. So it's like it's being done in other industries, but it's just different here. I think that kind of leads to another point that maybe brings up some confusion or with on the GP side of the spectrum, but is also, I think, important for investors that when they're analyzing and due diligencing a new syndication or a new fund is even all the GPs can't just be, you know, they can't just have a GP that's just raising money, right? I mean, they need to be doing more than that. Explain that, why it is, and you know, kind of give us some, you know, for the accredited investor who's looking for something, you know, what should they be looking out for? What kind of questions should they be asking to realize is this operator, is this GP, are they acting that way?
Yeah, so one of the big things is looking at how many of them are there. You know, for most deals, and I've had clients do complex development deals, and you know, huge multifamily acquisitions and things like that. And it's rare that you need more than like a handful of people. You know, there's no set number, but you know, if it's more than five, I'm going to start looking into it and questioning. And sometimes there could be a reason for that. But I'm going to start looking into that. When I've literally seen these where there's like 35 GPs, and I'm like, oh man, there's really like 3 DPs and 30 capital raisers is what's going on there.
I've seen those decks where the team just keeps going and going and going, and it's not like employees, it's GPs, and it's like, how can that be?
Yeah, so some things I tell clients to ask if they're on the investor side is, you know, you really do want to get to know that GP team and understand their background, their experience, and then also what is each of them bringing to the table. And so if you get it to where like there's 3 that are like, yeah, we're underwriting, we're working with the lender, we're working with the lawyers, and the rest of them are like, yeah, we do investor relations. That again, it's not absolutely wrong, but those are the things that get me saying, let's dive into that a little bit more. Let's figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I think, yeah, it goes to the point of, you know, there are two things that you see that are kind of common, where there's these additional people or people that are just raising money, and then, you know, people that are handing out, you know, fees and compensation and things like that. So 2 red flags there to kind of look out for. Anything else that comes to mind, you know, advertising is a big one. You know, if you're seeing ads and brochures or pitch decks that are promising stuff and things like that, you know, would you say that's another red flag that people should be a little weary of?
Yeah, if there's ever something that says it's a guarantee, I say run really fast, because there's nothing guaranteed.
Sure.
Especially in this space. You know, we hope for the best. We can give projections. We can say what we're hoping and thinking is going to happen. But if it says a guaranteed return, then I say, yeah, let's move on, because there's nothing that's guaranteed. Even, you know, the best laid plans can fail at times, and so nothing is guaranteed. So that's another one that you really want to run from, for sure.
What else? Anything else you think that the general part, or that passive LPs, you know, passive investors should be looking out for when analyzing, you know, PPM docs or advertisements, just kind of doing their due diligence on a new deal?
Yeah, so another one dealing with advertisements is that people, depending on which exemption they're using, such as if they're doing a 506c offering, you can advertise. They're allowed to advertise for that. But one thing that I've seen is some people will do a 506b offering. With a 506b offering, you must have a pre-existing substantial relationship with all of the investors. And I've been invited to a webinar or a 506B offering from somebody that I maybe had seen a few emails from, but that's it. And so something like that, I'm like, you don't have a pre-existing relationship with me at all. It's definitely not substantial. And so the reason why the investor wants to be concerned about that is that if your operator is violating securities laws, there's going to be legal costs, there might be disgorgement and other things, and those are things that are going to take away either from their time working on the asset to make your investment grow, and also potentially taking funds away that could have been distributions to you. So you really do want to make sure that your operator is fully buttoned up and knowing this stuff, understanding this stuff, and doing all the things they're supposed to do, because while it may not legally affect you as an investor, it can definitely affect you financially as an investor.
Sure. And if the funds are getting fined or something like that, I mean, it's money that's going towards those expenses versus money that's, paying returns or principal back or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, what are some of the things that you look for that you want to see all the time? I mean, you have, like you said, there's the PPM, there's subscription docs, operating agreement, and kind of a questionnaire or credit representation, depending on whether it's B or C. What are some of the things that you look for, you feel that are pretty standard that that you feel like every document should have? You mentioned risk disclosures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's the first thing I was gonna say. Big one is risk factors. That's a huge one, and it's kind of funny to me because I know when I'm drafting them for clients, they're like, "Why do we have to put this in there? Can we shorten those up?" And I kind of laugh. I'm like, when you point this out to me, that means I'm gonna like highlight it and put it in bold because it's something you're kind of not comfortable with, which I get, but that means we need to let them know. And then the counter to that is that when I get a PPM when I'm reviewing it for a client that's an investor, and it's looking like the world's gonna end. This could happen, that could happen, that could happen. Everything's gonna go bad. But if you want to invest with me anyway, that I'm like, yes, keep going. I like it because, as I said, nothing's guaranteed. Every deal is gonna have some issues. There's some things that's gonna keep the operator up at night sometimes, and every deal is gonna have that. That doesn't mean it's a bad deal. It just means that, hey, that's something that you should let the investors know so they can evaluate whether they want to put their money and risk their money for that sort of thing. So when I see those very thorough risk factors that are laying out all the bad stuff, I'm like, yes, that's a very good sign to me.
I love that perspective because I've had people tell me like, oh, these legal docs you have, they're so long, or you're going into so many risks. Like I have other deals where they're not half as long, and I kind of like that. And I'm thinking, I think it's the opposite. Like,
yeah,
I would be concerned. I'm thinking they're probably missing something. There's probably a lot that they're missing if their PPM docs are only a few pages long or something like that. I mean, I often wonder like what securities attorney thought that was acceptable. I mean, I feel like usually there's like just general risk disclosures that are in almost any document, right? I mean, and then there's all the deal specific ones as well. So it's like that along with everything else that goes in the PPM, with business, strategies, explanations and use of proceeds and kind of, explanations of the operating agreement and things like that. It seems like that should be a long document. So I'm happy to hear you say that. It's vindication for me in some ways.
Yeah. And you mentioned, what security attorney would draft that. And I've had someone, I'm like, I don't think an attorney, let alone a securities attorney drafted that.
Yeah.
And I get that, some sponsors want to copy and paste and things like that. I understand that. It's not lost on me at all. And I'm very upfront with my clients. I say, listen, one deal to the next, it's probably 75%, 80% the same. But you're paying me the big bucks to know which 20% is different and to make sure that we're addressing that appropriately. So copy and pasting your documents, even if you've done a whole lot of deals. I have clients that I've been working with for a decade. We've done, over a dozen deals together, and there's some small nuance or something that's very important. And at times, I'm like, oh, this is small. Obviously, I'm going to account for it and whatnot. But there are then times afterward where I'm like, ooh, I'm glad we added that small thing in because it became an issue. And so, not having thoroughly drafted documents, trying to copy and paste the documents. I get that you're saving a few bucks on the front end, but if things go wrong, you're going to be spending a whole lot more bucks on the back end.
Sure. No, that makes a really good point. I mean, this is a part of the business. Pretty much every part of the business, details matter, and this is one where even more so than others. The details really matter. So what are the differences? You said you've been doing a lot on the business side with acquiring businesses. What are some of the differences that you see? Like, if I'm an investor who's been doing a lot of 506B, 506C, kind of standard, real estate syndications and funds, multifamily, self-storage, that kind of stuff. What are some of the differences that I should expect to see when looking at documents for a business investment?
So the framework and everything should be the same. You're gonna have, operating agreement or partnership agreement, the PPM, the risk factors, the business plan, all of that. The risk factors are going to be a lot different because, at least a majority of them, the risks of a real estate are quite a bit different than operating a business in many times. So your risk factors are going to be a lot different, and your business plan is going to look a lot different as well. One thing I say, and that I always tell clients that are acquiring companies as well, is there's a difference between stock purchase and an asset purchase. So if we're doing an asset purchase of a business, that means you're buying everything that the business owns, but you're not buying the business itself. And many times that's what you're going to want to do, because if there's ghost liabilities outstanding somewhere, if you buy that business and you're doing a stock purchase, those liabilities are now yours. Whereas if you're just buying the assets, you're buying all the goods or things of value that they have, but not any of the liabilities. Now, some of the reasons why you might do a stock purchase to where you are taking that risk of liabilities. One, you're going to have the seller state and disclose if there are any that they know of. Then there also are what's called UCC lien searches, which is akin to a property search in the business bill.
Sure.
So you can kind of see if there are any liens or claims against the business that way. But the big reason why you might do a stock purchase versus an asset purchase, if the company's been around for a long time and has a strong credit line, that might be something that you're looking to take advantage of. And so if you did an asset purchase, you're not buying that company that has that credit line. And so that's one of the use case that I've seen for a stock purchase with clients, is that there's a company that has a strong credit history, and they don't want to be able to take advantage of that and capitalize on that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is that something, what do you think the driver is for you seeing more of those deals recently? Was it something personally that you were doing, or do you think the market is just, I feel like I've been seeing a lot of that on LinkedIn, maybe with interest rates and just certain challenges in the real estate business over the last few years. Operators that aren't as tied to a certain industry or asset class or whatever it may be tend to go, it's path of least resistance. They kind of move on to something else that might feel a little, maybe a little easier to access or something like that. What do you think are some of the drivers, that you've been seeing a lot more of those, it sounded like, than you did maybe a few years ago?
Yeah, I think one of them, kind of what you mentioned, the market, I still think real estate is a great investment, but, you're not going to easily get the double-digit returns that you would have gotten 5 years ago. Sure. Between 2018 to 2023, you could get into a deal, not really know what you're doing, and you're going to exit at a win.
Yeah.
Whereas
It's
now
hard to
you've
lose
got to be a
money,
lot more, you've got to be a lot more strategic. You got to underwrite a lot better. And even when you operate it well, a lot of times they're not producing quite the same numbers that you were getting a few years ago. So part of it is that I think the real estate market just has been a lot more competitive, and the returns are not what they were 3 or 4 years ago. And then another thing, I haven't looked into this, but anecdotally, I've heard a lot of businesses, kind of mom and pop businesses, those are people that started that business 20, 30 years ago. They're looking to retire. And so a lot of those businesses are for sale for very low, and sometimes not even paying a lot of money up front. And so there's just a lot of those businesses available. And so people are looking to take advantage, not in a bad way, but to say, hey, here's an opportunity that's available that wasn't as prevalent a few years ago. And so they're looking to take advantage of that way. Many times too, a business can cash flow a bit more than real estate. It's not going to necessarily appreciate as much,
Sure.
but it can cash flow more because, there's just lots more cash moving in a business in many cases.
Yeah. What are some of the biggest differences you'd see in like the waterfall? I think that, one of the things that it might be a little confusing to investors on the real estate side, I don't know the business side as well, is there's so many different waterfall structures out there, 80-20 split, the prefs ranging from God, 5, 6, 7, it's up towards 12, 15, 18, you name it. And then splits between typically somewhere, well, of course, I've heard of ones where they weren't even, it was 80-20 the opposite way, you know what I mean? Or 90-10 the opposite way, where the GP's getting the bulk of the lion's share. And there's different reasons for that, but I always feel like because there's not really, I think there is some industry standard out there, but it varies for different reasons and all. Is that something that comes up with clients, when they're asking, when you're looking at documents for them? I'm wondering too, maybe I would assume in some cases, operators that you're doing paperwork for maybe ask you what industry standard is for this or that. And then I'm curious to how that relates to business, how those waterfalls look. And is there some similarities, between them, or if there's a lot of differences, what do they look like?
Yeah, so I always tell clients on the operator side when you're figuring out the splits and how you're going to do distributions, you want to look at first off, what can the deal actually hold? Then what's going to entice your investors, and then also what's going to motivate you. So those are the three things I say that they should be thinking about and coming up with that. Because as you said, there is no industry standard, but you don't want to make a projection that you just know that the deal's not going to be able to handle. Sure. And then at the same time, you want to make sure that this offering is marketable to where people are going to want to invest. But you don't want to give away so much to where you're like, I'm doing all this work and not getting anything. So yeah, that's kind of what I tell clients on the operational side, the things to keep in mind when they're figuring out what those splits are going to be. And then yeah, on the investor side, I just say, think about what you're willing to risk your money for. And there's multiple factors that you're risking here. Part of it is just, the deal itself, the asset itself. And then also your belief in the operator's ability to meet their projections. And so depending on how you're feeling with that risk, the more risk that you feel, you're probably going to want a larger split. Or if it's less risk, then there might be a smaller split. Another thing that I see that can make a big difference in those splits is how much skin the GP team has in the game. Because I do work with some developer clients as well, for instance, and they might be at a situation where the developer has purchased the land outright. So they've already got a good amount of capital in there. And it's very risky when you're buying just raw dirt because you can't get financing on that for a lot of times. And who knows what the city or municipality might approve for you. And so those are the ones where I often might see a larger split, like a 50-50, or you mentioned the 80-20 in favor of the GP, but that's because they've outlaid a lot of their capital and it's much riskier when they've outlaid it as well. Well, yeah, if you're looking at kind of your standard multifamily, if I'm seeing, a more favorable to the GP than like 60-30 in favor of in favor of the investors, if it's that favorable or less, then I'm going to start looking at why are we having the splits that low. But again, it goes back to those three things. I've had a client in the past where they did 50-50 splits in like a 5% prep, which was like far outside of the market standards. But he said, yeah, my investors like it. It works with them. And so I was like, great, you're disclosing it all. So there's nothing wrong with that. If the investors like it and the deal can handle it and you're happy with it, then it works.
Yeah. Would you say over the course of time working with different clients, are there any kind of attributes that you look for, that you would want to invest in when it comes to a GP and operator? Just anything that stands out, from maybe others where you felt the opposite way or that kind of thing. I'm curious, from your perspective, because you're looking at it from a completely different perspective, right? Than maybe a lot of investors would be. So, what is it that excites you in an operator or a deal, and why?
So yeah, a lot of times the investor probably won't be able to pick up on this, but me as the attorney, I can see it. The clients that have a healthy amount of fear, not crazy scared, but a healthy amount of fear, because this is a big undertaking. You're taking people's hard-earned capital. There's some risk involved. So yeah, should be a somewhat of a scary thing. Not scary enough to where you're necessarily going to quit, but to where you're saying, hey, let me proceed with caution because I understand the magnitude of what I'm doing. So I think that's something that is important. And then from the investor side, something that they can see is communication. How communicative are they with you? How much information are they providing? And I always tell clients that are looking to invest, I say, let's figure this out on the front end, because if you're having trouble getting in touch with them and they don't have any of your money, then you don't want to be in that situation when they have your capital and things are going wrong and you're calling and can't get a hold of them or emailing and not getting a response. So I think communication is a big one that investors should be looking at before plunging into the investment.
Yeah, wow. I think I love that perspective on the fear side. You know, I mean, communication is 100%. I hear it all the time. Communications is like it's probably one of the biggest things that I value. It's in like the top three. You know, it's important to me personally when I make investments or I deal with any company that I'm dealing with. And to be able to talk to somebody, be able to pick up a phone, talk to somebody, send an email, get a response in a relatively, reasonable period of time. And I hear it so many times, that people, it's just not the case. You know what I mean? That they're just not getting that for whatever reason. And I get it to some degree, especially in smaller operations where you're wearing a lot of hats, that kind of thing. It could be a challenge. But to your point, I think communications is unbelievably important. And then the fear side, like you said, if somebody's like really comfortable with taking millions of dollars of other people's money and there's no fear of I mean just being confident around like what's going to happen or where it's going to go and things like that, then they're probably a little bit crazy. It's just they don't even, or they're ignorant. I mean, they don't even realize, I mean, all the different pressures and things that can go wrong and stuff like that. So I love that perspective. I think that's great. Wow. So how did you get into this business? I feel like as an attorney, there's so many flavors of legal that you can get into, right? You know what I mean? How did you find yourself in securities law? To me, it would be a very exciting place to be, but I'm always curious to how, how does attorneys, how do you pick like, which field you want to get into?
Yeah, definitely many flavors of law, and I'd say securities is one of those really small niche flavors that not even a lot of lawyers know. When I say I do securities or syndication, they're like, huh?
Yeah.
So I started out, and I still do. My firm is completely transactional, so we're not litigating or in court at all. I started out primarily focusing on real estate transactions and then general business, so entity formation, contract drafting, that sort of stuff. And so I had a client early on. I can't remember which one was which, but I had two syndications that I did early on. One of them was somebody. I'm based in Los Angeles, and somebody said, "Hey, I've got this script. I want to make this movie. I need to raise $600,000 or something like that." And so they said, "Can you help me with the documentation?" And so that was one of the first syndications that I did. And then the second one was I had a client that was a family-owned winery, and the grandfather had owned a construction company and made a lot of money doing that. And then the next generation kind of relaxed and didn't work too much. And so now we're at the grandchildren's generation, and they had this winery, and they were struggling financially and were potentially going to lose it. And so we said, hey, how about if we sell off a portion of the winery so we can raise some capital and get that in so you can do your operations and make the renovations and stuff that you need. And so those were the first two syndications and securities work that I did. And then probably it wasn't for another probably 2 years until I did my first real estate syndication. And that's with a client that I had helped with real estate transactions. And then I did one. I said, oh, I like this. Like I've done the securities before, and now we're doing that with real estate. It's a lot. I like that a lot. And so I did a couple more deals with that client, and I was like, yeah, I think this really like piques my interest. And so started getting referrals from that client and other people, and slowly built it up that way. And so the first syndication, though, that winery and the movie, that was in about 2012. And then I think the first real estate one was 2014 or 2015. And then I'd say by 2016 or 2017, securities became the big part of the practice. And so even now, it's like 60 to 70% of what we do.
Wow. Yeah. I think that it sounds like the timing was right there because syndications over the last, few years, 5, 6 years or so, have seemed to really take off, and I always used to joke like, house flipping, was one of those things anybody could do it. You go to a weekend seminar and you can flip a house, right? And I think over the last 5, 6, 7 years or so, raising a fund has kind of become that to some degree, right? It's just like anybody can be a fund manager, anybody can raise money for other people's funds. And we spoke about this, a little bit earlier in the conversation. But what's your thoughts on this kind of this culture of, fund managers, fund to funds, all that kind of stuff? What are some things that people need to look out for when they're investing through like an allocator or a fund to funds, and not investing directly? Because that always seems to be like they're trying to get compensated in a lot of different ways and things like that. So I'm curious your thoughts on on that. And yeah, and do you work with those clients? I mean, I'm assuming you might have some of those, so I'm curious to what you think about that.
Yeah, we do create funds. We also have created fund of funds as well. The first thing I'd say is that when you start dealing with, especially when you're dealing with a fund where you're investing in other people's assets, not ones that you're controlling, the regulatory compliance increases dramatically. Most of the time, with your standard run-of-the-mill syndication, we're just dealing with the Securities Act. But then when you start dealing with fund of funds, for instance, we're dealing with the Securities Act and then the Investment Company Act, as well as the Investment Advisors Act, and sometimes a few other ones as well. So your regulatory compliance increases dramatically. Now, with all of those, at least most of them, there usually are exemptions or exclusions to where you're not having to do the full, very expensive and cumbersome registration, but there are processes that you have to go through. And so that's one of the big things is that, especially if I have a client investing in like a fund or fund of fund, I'm gonna look in what filings have they done, what types of registrations have they done, are they making sure that they're doing this compliantly?
Yeah.
So that's one of the big things. And then another thing to keep in mind, or that I looked at with a fund of fund, particularly if it's a fund of fund, you should have access to the main offering or the main fund or whatever it is to what their documents are. And you want to look at that to understand what's the main deal, because that's ultimately what you're investing in. And so you want to understand what those risks are and what's going on there. And one thing with that is look at what returns are they offering. I've seen sometimes where, and there can be occasions where it makes sense, but I've seen sometimes where, maybe the main fund is doing a 80-20 split and, a 10% pref. I'm just making numbers.
Yeah.
But then the fund of fund is doing a 70-30 split and like a 6% pref.
Yeah.
And so if that's the case to where you're getting returns that are different than what investing directly is, you want to make sure there's a reason for that. Sure. Sometimes the reason might be the main fund might require $500,000 to invest, whereas this fund of fund, you can do $25,000. Okay, if that's the case, yeah, you can take a bit of a haircut, maybe not the example I just gave, but you can take a bit of a haircut because there's an advantage you're getting because you probably wouldn't have otherwise been able to invest in this deal in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's so important in those setups that there's a value being added somewhere. That it's not just like, because to your point, I mean, why not just invest directly? So I think there's a time and a place for them, but it seems like there's been a lot that have come around in the last couple of years, and it'll be interesting to see where that shakes out. I think you gave some great advice to kind of how to due diligence those offerings and learn more, because I'm sure a lot of them probably are very upfront with the original offering, and who the operator is and all that kind of stuff. And there's others that are probably to try to hold that back. I've had some of those conversations with my investors where they've said, I'm investing in an apartment or something like that. And I'll say, oh, where is it? And what's the details? And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, what? What the heck you don't know? I mean, it's like, because it's through one of these like allocation type funds, and I guess that they're not providing that information, and that I would be somewhat skeptical there. And if I'm sure there is some kind of, they got to be making money some way. I mean, so I'm sure they are taking a fee somewhere along the way, but if they're providing value and that's worth it for you from a due diligence perspective, or analysis, or they're going to the property and doing that kind of stuff, or like you said, like an example where it's $1 million minimum, $500,000 minimum, and they're pooling money together, then that's great, and there's a clear value there. But so I think that's very important and great advice for people that are looking to get into those types of offerings. Well, this has been, go for it.
Just another point on that. Yeah, we require that when we do a fund of fund for a client, we require that they disclose that. And we actually put it in as a hyperlink, and it's on a cloud folder that we have, so we know the documents there. So where that person is looking at the PPM we created for that fund of fund, they can click a link and see all the documentation of the main deal as well. And we require clients to do that because one of the big things the SEC looks at is disclosure. These are private offerings. If it's a public company, you could look up all the filings and all the disclosures that are required. And we don't have that here, but the SEC says, hey, you still need to let them know information that any rational and reasonable investor would want to know. And so understanding the metrics and what's going on with the main deal is something that most reasonable investors would want to know.
Yeah. Wow. This has been a great conversation, jam-packed with very useful information, and just I think there was a lot of golden nuggets in here for people to take with them and bring into their just kind of their due diligence analysis arsenal. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me. If people want to learn more, on the operator side, they want to talk to you about setting up a fund or syndication for accredited investors that want to maybe work with you from having you look at some documents and things like that. How can people learn more about you, your company, what you do, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you can reach the firm. It's Polymath Legal. So that's POLYMATHLEGAL.com. That's the website. There you can message us. You can schedule a free 50-minute consultation directly, and also has our phone number as well. You can also find me on social media at Nic the Lawyer. That's NIC the Lawyer. I'm there on Instagram and TikTok and record fun, at least moderately fun. I mean, it's law here, so maybe not the most fun, but try to keep it fun, legal videos. And then I also actually do a free, usually it's once or twice a month, a free Zoom link, free for the first 100 people. It's for Nick's, go to nickslawlessons.com. So NICSLAWLESSONS.com. So Nick's Law Lessons. And you can sign up for the newsletter, and then we'll get you, make sure you get the information, see that. And on those, I just kind of either will pick a topic that people have asked about, or maybe I see clients having issues or what have you. And so I pick a topic. We usually will do about 30 minutes of kind of planned presentation, and then have 30 minutes for Q&A that can be on that topic or just other topics that are under my expertise as well.
Awesome. Well, Nick, great conversation. Really appreciate you being here today, and I thank you so much. So,
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to do it again whenever you want to.
definitely.